Okay, today we have the distinct privilege of welcoming Kashif to our grouping here, and he's going to be speaking to us about conscious healthy aging and how to stay well in respect to what his company provides in that respect. So I'll probably be moderating back and forth, asking questions, and folks, if there's time, we'll open it up for questions too later on. But Kashif, how would you say that you help individuals stay healthy consciously as they age with your work?
I had to do this for myself personally, so I can speak to it from that perspective, which is that when I was quite ill a few years ago, multiple things going on. Migraines was probably the worst part. My business partner would have to drive me home. I couldn't function. Eczema, psoriasis, depression, digestive issues, all kind of happened at the same time. And what I learned is what drove us to what we now do. And what I learned was that I was going to five different doctors for five different things, all to be told, take a pill for this, go get a scan for this. And my question of why are these things happening wasn't even a consideration. It was more like, what? You have this, you now are an eczema patient, and you now take this pill or you now use this cream. That was the belief. And I had never really been sick before that. So I never experienced going to multiple doctors and taking multiple pills, so I never had to ask the question before of why is this happening? So that led me down this path of why really isn't provided as an answer. And I had to find that myself. So I eventually landed on some functional medicine practitioners that were able to dig a little deeper. And that led me to discovering my genome. And the big aha moment was that I was literally missing, forget about what version or what variation, I was literally missing certain genes for which they're meant to instruct key detox processes. And I was working out of a building that was highly toxic because there was a manufacturing company downstairs. And you wonder why I had an issue, but my business partner was fine and would drive me home, when I was sick, because genetically he was not like me. That was the big aha moment for me, that how many people out there have similar stories where they just can't understand why they're going, whether it's Lyme disease or mold intolerance or whatever, and it's just so much worse for them. And they don't know what to do because the answer for them is the average answer. It's not the personalized answer. And that pushed me towards, this is now my mission. And I literally started working on it.
Okay, so you had your own personal experience, and then you actually saw what you needed body-wise in terms of help assisting. Actually, just corresponding with that, actually, I did my DNA test, and I've had a little concern with my stomach for the past little while, and I've had to take a Pepsid AC to keep that at bay. But
Right.
Since I've been taking the recommendations and actually abiding by the conscious recommendations, I haven't had to take a Pepsid AC in a good while now. So my own personal story, I can relate to what you're saying too.
Yep, I was the same. I was on, so I had acid reflux issue, which was horrible. And of course, you're told too much acid, take this pill that reduces the acid levels. But what's actually going on is, well, there's multiple things going on, but the one key one, just to keep it simple, is this sphincter you have here that's supposed to close is a muscle. And if you don't use muscle, they atrophy. And what triggers the closing is the acid actually hitting and touching it, right? And that's, your body's brilliant and resilient, knows what to do. And if your acid levels are too low, it's not causing that reaction, and the muscle atrophies, and all of a sudden that low acid comes through into your esophagus, and the answer is you have too much acid, right? There's no testing of the actual pH levels or to understand what's really going on. So I did the opposite. I purged myself and created that acid reflux to train this thing, to close. But I also understood that my gut lining genetically was more susceptible to sort of a dysbiosis or, harm, because the key detox genes, and this is part of what I was saying earlier, I was missing. So when I was eating anything that had pesticides, chemicals, food coloring, all the stuff that you hear about, for me, I didn't have that sort of first line of defense filtering all that stuff, preventing it from going through my digestive tract and entering my bloodstream. So it's causing this inflammatory state, which eventually starts to chip away at your gut lining, leading to leaky gut. And when you have leaky gut, everything gets screwed up because the inflammatory toxic substrates go everywhere, directly into your blood, right? So that's what I was experiencing. Anyway, to your point, these two things happened to me at the same time, the reflux and that kind of leaky gut situation. So I dealt with them both at the same time. And like yourself, I don't have a problem now, right?
Actually, when I began taking the detox optimizer from your company, I think that was a helpful thing because my genetics shows I'm compromised detoxification wise. And how I've been describing it, and Carol's been appreciating this, if you don't have the detoxification processes and inflammation builds up, the detoxification can't actually get rid of that inflammation that builds up over time. But you think more in terms of getting back to our theme of conscious healthy aging, to positioning our bodies in a way where we wouldn't need the over-the-counter medications or prescription medications, which could reduce the side effects over time. So, having that in mind, keep us healthy for the long term.
Yeah, that is, I mean, that doesn't need to sound like it sounds like a pipe dream for some people. It's taken for granted that aging and disease are one and the same, but they're not. So when it comes to chronic conditions, chronic disease, which is the majority of our problems, right? I think the CDC says that 90% of our $4 trillion healthcare budget, $3.6 trillion is spent on chronic disease. None of those things you're born with. You're not born with diabetes, cholesterolemia, breast cancer. Why do all these things happen later in life? It's not the result of aging. There's a few things going on. If you're genetically mismatched to your habits, diet, lifestyle, environment, well, then eventually you're going to cause the inflammatory load that causes a disease to sort of poke through. But your body is really good at fighting this stuff off. So it takes a long time, right? If you're exposing yourself to chemicals or whatever it may be, even something as simple as pesticides in your beautiful lawn, you can do that for 50 years until one day your body says, I've had enough, right? And then what disease, it just depends where your cellular structure isn't the best. If you don't have high quality endothelium, that inner lining of the blood vessel, well, then you may get a heart disease. If you have toxic estrogens or you're estrogen dominant as a woman, you may get breast cancer, right? If you have poor ability to deal with cholesterol transport, you may get Alzheimer's or dementia. So we can start to predict, here's your profiles, your various profiles in your brain, in your heart, in your stomach. Here's your red flags, right? You're not sick. You don't have any of these problems, but you have a propensity towards them if you have the wrong environment, nutrition, and lifestyle choices for you, not general advice, like what your body actually needs. If you have the right, and this is the best part about what you just asked, if you have the right nutrition, environment, lifestyle choices, you won't get sick. Because when you get your typical genetic report, what does it tell you? You got an 80% chance of Alzheimer's. What does that mean? That also means you have a 20% chance of not getting Alzheimer's with the exact same genomic map. Why? Because you weren't born with Alzheimer's. It happens, as you mature, because again, you have to do the wrong thing for so long that you trigger that problem to sort of exist. You could also do the right thing for so long, matched to your genomic needs, and it never happens. Or if you're in that disease state, as opposed to treating it and managing it, let's work on reversing it. Because we're going to deal with the why, the root cause, as opposed to the what, the problem that you have, right? So
yes.
This is where we think about aging and disease very differently. It's truly optional. The vitality and youth and energy you have in your 20s and 30s should extend till, one day you're somewhere in the Caribbean on a cruise ship and you just happen to, who knows, just die peacefully in your sleep. That's how it should be, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It lends itself to aging in a graceful way, but extending the quality of our longevity. So I was just reading something where folks aren't so much thinking about living a long time, but people want to live with mobility, with good brain function, with the quality of life as long as possible. So the map that I find, with your work and your company's work is you guys give not just data for genomics, you give the whole, like my big thing is health education. You give the aspects to help assist a person in terms of what lifestyle factors would be best for a person. And I find too that not everything may apply, but the things that do apply will make you smile because you'll see how they work, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's this again comes from personal experience. And it's funny that um, you know, somebody had to come from outside of the industry. And when I say somebody, I mean our whole team, not just myself, to build something in the way that we actually need it. Meaning, prior to this, I was also, call it, failed by genetics, where I was told, hey, 80% chance of this, 60% of that. And then you had to go find some PhD or doctor that understood the data. And even them, they didn't quite get it because they weren't trained on it. And you're getting this underwhelming. I just paid a lot of money to scan my genome, and really nothing has changed. Other than I've identified that my ear is connected or not connected, which, I kind of already knew. But there's some entertainment level stuff in there, but the stuff that I actually need to know, I'm not getting. So it was exactly as you described. First, and again, from personal experience, knowing what I wanted from this data. Here's the data. Your genome's been scanned. Somebody has to interpret it, right? Data is dumb unless you know what question to ask it and what answer to derive from it. It's just a bunch of information. So what I found I personally needed, which is now the way we design the reports, which is I don't need to know what version of what gene I have. I need to be able to look up anxiety, weight loss, hair loss, and know what my genes are saying about those things. Let's pick the top 100 problems that people are dealing with and put those into the reports, which is what we did. So, we look at sleep, cardiovascular, diet, nutrition, hormones, cellular health and immunity, and then mood and behavior, which is the biggest report, everything about your brain. These are the things that if you went through all of it, you've kind of eliminated most chronic diseases, right? And that's kind of what you need to know. So that's one. Let's speak to the problems, not the genes, because I don't really need to know my genes. I need to know that it's there, that there's science driving what you're telling me. But I just need to very easily be able to read this, interpret it, understand it based on the problem I'm trying to solve. Second is recommendations. Now that you've uniquely told me how you think about my problem. So when we talk about, breast cancer, we don't talk about a mastectomy and as a prevention, go cut a piece of yourself off. We talk about why does the breast cancer happen? Estrogen toxicity, inability to clear that estrogen toxicity, menopausal women no longer having a menstrual cycle, now storing that estrogen toxicity in fat because your body wants to protect the organs. Well, where do women have fat? In the breasts. And why do you think there's an inflammatory insult at that menopause age that causes something like breast cancer, right? So that's the why part. So we should very easily be able to, because we think about the problem uniquely, also give you unique solutions that aren't typical for that problem. So that was number two. Now that I've been told, here's why this is happening, not what it is, here's how you deal with the why. Here's a supplement or lifestyle recommendation, a habit you need to form in order to prevent or reverse. And the third thing, which we realized was also needed, which we don't claim to be good at, is now that this has all been provided, even then, we are all humans. We're going to stuff it in a drawer somewhere and never do it, right? That is typical. Some of us, yeah, we're reward seeking, and based on your DNA, we can tell you how your brain works and who's actually going to do it and who's not going to do it. But for the most part, we're not going to do it. So we had to make it easy, which is now that you know what's wrong and how to fix it, how do you actually implement or change the behaviors so that it sticks, so that it's your new reality? If you know that you need to walk every evening to boost your brain-derived neurotropic factor so that you can sleep properly, one simple thing, you still may not do it. So what's the hack that will make sure you do it, right? How do you schedule your day? How do you make that happen? So we actually hired Dr. BJ Fogg, who he runs the Stanford University Behavioral Change Lab. So he's a guru when it comes to behavior change. He wrote the book Tiny Habits about how to implement behavior change. And he wrote that whole section of the report for all the systems. So now you have, here's what's wrong, here's what we recommend, and here's how you actually do it. The very easy, when you read it, it's kind of like, well, I already knew that, because it has to be that easy and intuitive that it sounds like it's like already second nature, right? And that's how we believe you can truly derive value from genomics, how it's meant to be, and slow down aging, add an extra 10, 15 healthy years to your life.
Yeah, that's what I've loved about the report. That's why I've been telling my patients and telling other folks too about the work that you're doing. Some people have a concern, though, like to being boxed in. When you get your genomic report, like how would you couch or present in a way to individuals so they don't feel boxed in with their genomics, where I'm all like this, I'm always going to be like this, but to have a little bit of an openness like that? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, and I guess when you look at the recommendations, it kind of becomes sort of obvious, meaning that here we're saying that you're more prone to anxiety, as an example, right? And when we think about anxiety, it's not one thing. There's multiple reasons why you may have anxiety issues. For example, if I take myself, I deal with what's called a high functioning anxiety versus an acute. So it's more chronic for me. Why? My dopamine levels are really low. So I'm constantly teetering this area of like not enough pleasure and reward. It's hard for me to experience pleasure and reward. And my serotonin is also dysregulated. So I'm constantly prompted by stimulus. So I'm not getting enough reward, and I'm seeing and noticing everything. So this anxiousness of wanting to get things done all the time, right? I need more and I need more. And it creates this high functioning anxiety that drives me towards doing things. Then there's people that experience dopamine really easily and they're just constantly satisfied and happy. And when you give them the bad news, the delta value between where they're used to being to bad is a much bigger crash for them. So they experience more of an acute response where the world is over. I can't go to work today. I can't ever talk to that person again. But it's siloed in events as opposed to the chronic high function, which is just day to day. It's just part of life. That's how you think, right? So even just separating those two, and we could talk about 5 or 6 different types of anxiety. Those are just two. So now when you go into the reports, like you said, to not feel boxed in, we don't believe you should be told, here's who you are. Once you start to look at the recommendations, you can understand where you are on the scale, meaning here's my genetic propensity. If I'm already doing things right, that's why I'm not really resonating with this comment, right? I don't feel like this because you're already doing what's right for that genetic profile, and you'll see it in the recommendations, right? If you're not doing things right, then you're probably going to resonate right away. Like that sounds like me,
Yeah,
right?
that's what makes you smile.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, so it becomes sort of self-serve, where getting out of that box, like you said, it's not, you're not being pigeonholed and saying, here's you, too bad, right? It's more like, here's your potential, good and bad, if you could sort of tune these habits properly, right? So it becomes easy for you to then control if you're in the box or not.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this whole thing is about, the thing I want to really bring into the world is conscious health. Like you're making it conscious there.
Yeah.
And you think about as we're as individuals, if we can be conscious, it's going to lend itself to a whole increase of conscious awareness for, you can say, the masses, and to have a bigger picture in that respect. So how would, is part of your purpose looking to actually change the world? Is that why you're doing what you're doing?
Yeah, so that's what hit me when this happened. When I sort of healed myself, I was running a fairly successful marketing company where we would help startup companies grow. That was my thing. I really enjoyed great ideas and helping them get to some next level. That's what I did every day. And when I stumbled across what happened here, I literally took the keys, handed them to my business partner, and said, "Thank you so much. It's yours. You keep the company. I'm not asking for anything. I found what I have to focus on," because the impact and the potential change and what I've been able to do with my own family. My niece, who literally was having anxiety issues to the point where she ran away from home, who has 0 problems now, who would have been on a pill, right? She would have been diagnosed on a pill for life. She doesn't have a problem. We are able to find out genetically what's going on, and with simple supplements and meditation and stuff, she has no issue, right? Um, so yeah, the intention for me is we've just finished going through this research phase where the research model in genetics did what it needed to do for genetics 101, is what do the genes mean, right? Let's figure out what each gene means. Well, here's the science. But it wasn't, how does this change people's lives? How do we apply this clinically? That's the gap. So we spent 3 years studying 7,000 patients. We followed them around for 3 years to understand, how do we take all of the data that's published, where you can already pull all these publications everywhere, and implement it into clinical practice for the person that's 80% or 20%. What are they doing right and wrong? We actually studied the people that had big red flags but weren't sick. What were they doing right? And we studied the people that got sick a little too soon. What were they doing wrong? And started to understand these things, which are now in the reports. So the next phase for me is now that we've done this and we're working with brilliant people like yourself and getting it out through practices, the next phase is to normalize this as kind of standard of practice. This is, if this exists, and chronic disease is such a big burden, 90% of our healthcare budget, which you don't need to have. Well, we don't need to eliminate the budget. I know there's certain people that won't like that, the shift in the economics, but it just needs to move to a different place, which is disease prevention, early identification, as opposed to management, right? All the big players can still enjoy being in business. They don't need to stop. They just need to do their business differently. So this is what I believe we can power. And we're now starting to talk to sort of telemedicine companies, healthcare innovators, different digital companies to empower them so they can do a better job. And I think slowly that will trickle into mainstream healthcare.
Yes, I think you're touching the chord, especially with Bob Smith on the line here. He helps people set up insurance. Bob, do you have any comment in reference to what Kashif just said? Because I know you acknowledge that big picture.
Yeah, what Kashif just said is so resonates with me, because when I think of our healthcare industry, it's more like sick care, not healthcare. So to marshal the big players, forget the government for the moment, but the insurance companies and Kashif, and when you think of later on in life, the illnesses that we are confronted with, if we can somehow, before we get to that point, be more preventative, the amount of money that would be saved is astronomical. So have the insurance companies, you mentioned you're reaching out and you're trying to marshal the efforts. Has there been pushback or receptivity?
So we've seen a big flip post-COVID, and there's social pressure, right? So first of all, people have a misconception on what insurance is. They're not insuring you, they're just the provider. So they're actually profiting off of each service, unless it's something like a critical issue, like you're spending $100,000 on a surgery or whatever. But for the most part, they're kind of an intermediary helping the employer or whoever deploy the budget. So they actually profit off of things you use, right? So 2 years ago, there was a lot of pushback. It was a lot of, oh, this sounds amazing at the first meeting type level. And then once it got to the decision makers, it would disappear. We are now getting approached by insurance companies saying, we know we need a prevention first model. There's too much social pressure. There's too much demand. We'll figure out the economics first. We're going to lose our customers if we don't do this. And that's, your wallets drive change. That's what happens. If you stop, if employers say that we don't want your plan anymore because we don't want sick people, we want healthy people, well, they're going to have to create a new product. So in the last few months, we've done a big shift. Major insurers out here, probably in Canada, one of the top 3 has approached us. And there's a company now in the US that called us out of the blue, saying that they want to build a program not only for their customers, but also for their own employees, because they realize that they don't know what they're doing when it comes to prevention, right? So they now need it for their own employees. So we're 1 or 2 or 3 of those, and we're going to start chipping away, proving it out. And the data is going to be so undeniable that people have to adopt it. How can you continue down that old road, when you have a company next door where everybody's healthy and thriving?
There's a concern if insurance is involved. I mean, the greater picture is moving along in that direction. But if insurance is involved, there's concerns about security, folks' individual security concerns.
For sure,
about having their data breached. So how would you speak to that?
So first of all, that's a very valid concern. I'll tell you a dirty secret about the genetic testing industry. So the business isn't a great business because your DNA never changes. So I only need to test you once. That's the problem. So all of these companies that were funded and did heavy research, etc., the investors started saying, well, wait a second, you sell somebody a DNA test and they're gone. They're done. There's no lifetime value to that customer. And so they had to come up with a new model, which is, well, why don't we take their information and sell it to people? And that became the business. So when you go online and buy some recreational DNA test that's well priced, and it gives you some infotainment level report, it's not designed for you. It's designed for the buyer of the data. They've already told them, here's what we're willing to buy and here's how much we're willing to pay for it, including insurance companies, including pharma companies. If you look at 23andMe, when they did their big fundraising round, I think it was 2019, $300 million came from Glaxo, right? So why was Glaxo so interested in investing in them? So what we said is, because of this model, the consumer isn't getting what they desire, which is take my DNA, mine it, and tell me everything, right? What they're getting is a list of genes with some probability, because that's what the data buyer wants. Collect as many genes as possible with signed consent for research. That's all they want. So we realize there's an opportunity that if we become the company that does a better job of interpretation, that gives you more value, that gives you a platform that is actually actionable for you, we're going to own the community of people that want to use this for their health. And then we do get that reoccurring business through coaching and through supplements and the actual solutions that people need. So strict in our policy, in our terms, we do not sell data. We don't even have access to it. It's aggregated and anonymized in our system. So the way our database is built, it's useless to a data buyer anyway. We can't say, here's Bob's data. He's this old, this ethnicity, lives in this city. It doesn't exist in our system. It's a bunch of, yeah.
So if insurance got involved, that would lend itself to protecting someone's data?
Yeah, so they will say, we want this, and we will say, no, thanks. That's not how we do business. Go back to 23andMe and your product's going to suck, right? So if you want what we do, which is we're years and years ahead of what these guys are doing, this is the way we play ball.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, just thinking about theme again, what does it take? Anything more you would like to comment on? Like, how do we stay healthy as we age? So having the conscious awareness in that respect. So, one thing that I love about the reports you provide is the mood and behavior review of seeing what it takes to stay actually mind-wise and thought-wise in a way that allows us to make right choices. So,
I think
to speak more to that.
Sure. In the mood and behavior report, we haven't yet spoken of the gene cast, which is the audio files we provide. And I think this is really impactful in the mood and behavior report. So what we did was, again, coming as a customer and buyer of DNA testing, and what did I want and need that I didn't get? So even though we give you all the information in these reports and give you all these recommendations, people still want to know more. Tell me about the genes. What do they mean? So the only way to do that is usually to sit in front of a PhD, which is hard to scale and make available to everybody, and it's expensive. And have them look at your raw data and tell you, this is what this gene does, here's what it means, here's how that applies to you, right? Beyond looking at the conditions. So we created what we call a gene cast, which is a personalized podcast for you. It's in your portal with your reports, which speaks to each gene. So you're looking up the conditions, anxiety, addiction, depression, etc. But you're also listening to a PhD talk to you about your DNA. So our AI, artificial intelligence, pulls on all these audio files. It gives you the ones that are recommended for you. And now all of a sudden you can paint a picture of how your brain works. You're not just understanding depression, you're not just understanding addiction, but you're understanding the hard wiring of your brain. So this is so important because you start to understand how you comply. How when you learn something in your reports about why you can't sleep at night, or how to lose those last 10 pounds that you got stuck in a plateau, how are you actually going to comply and do it? It's one thing to know it, it's one thing to do it. So if you understand the neurochemicals of your brain and how you're wired, and it's going to give you these wow aha moments of like, oh, that's why I don't get along with this person. That's why I always fight with my hubby about this one thing, because you start to understand how you think. A simple example, some people have a deleted version of the ADRA2B gene. So now speaking to the genes, which means that they stay in negative stimulus for longer. It's hard for them to get out of it, which means they're more prone to PTSD and trauma, which means that the next time there's a fight with a hubby, it's like, not this again. You're starting off exactly where you left off last time with the feeling. You're literally, you imprint the feeling of that negative stimulus. And the next time something reminds you of it, you're not recalling the information, you're recalling the feeling. This is genetically driven. So now imagine the impact of, why am I always having an issue with my kid or my hubby or my whoever on this particular thing? Because that's the thing, that you're using your emotion to remember and talk about it, as opposed to the intellect of it to talk about it. So that one little nuance can fix a relationship, right? That one little nuance can help you explain why this kid listens and this one doesn't.
Yeah.
Right? When you get home with a frown and one kid won't talk to you because they're relating that frown to something you did 2 days ago, right? Because they bind trauma. And the other one, you tell them clean your room, and 2 minutes later they're not clean, they're doing something else. They completely ignore negative stimulus, right? So
Right.
one little nuance can change everything. Imagine diving deep into all the nuances of your brain.
Yes. That's a key there. And again, it's careful how we present it as practitioners to those who get the test. So again, to give an overarching view that you have this propensity,
Yeah,
at the same time not having the person think they're locked into that.
sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
But that's where I always come back to the fact that it will make you smile when you see your patterns and your past experience there.
Yes.
Good, Kashif. I think this may have stimulated some questions on the part of the folks who are present. But one other question I had: you think I was talking with Carol, that because of the environment in the world today, that's causing genetic variants, or how would you describe
Not that it's causing variation. So the variance in the genetic evolution of your DNA takes a long time, right? So we are like people of 200,000 years ago. Our genetics are the same, right? So, and this is, it's more about what are we capable of? So this is an epigenetic question.
Kash, can I back up? Why would you say that?
So when you look at the DNA of who we are, why our brains are bigger than primates, why we can speak the way we can, why we can sing, right? That phenomenon happened about 200,000 years ago. And it's not very clear why. You may have religious beliefs, you may have scientific beliefs, there's different things explaining why that happened. But around 200 to 250,000 years ago, things changed and we appeared, right? And we appeared in our form with our bigger brains and our certain ability to speak and sing and think and feel as human beings. From that time, we are pretty much the same. Our DNA is not much different. And there's two things here. There's epigenetic inheritance. For example, there's science that proves that if you look at the children of Holocaust survivors, you can measure trauma in their epigenetics. So they've inherited the trauma of their parents because it was so intense. And I'm sure if you look at other, areas where similar things have happened, you will find the same, right? So that one step away, one generation inheritance is possible. That's an epigenetic, like hard imprint that is expressing in your DNA. So it's not a change in your DNA, it's an expression. That gene works harder, right?
Okay, that's a good point to really describe a little bit further so people understand that. So there's your genes and then there's epigenetics.
Right.
So again, can rephrase that so folks can get that understanding?
So here's your genes, here's the version of what genes you have. Now, based on what you're doing, which is the next thing we were going to get into, you talked about the environment, here's how hard that gene is working. Meaning, if I am a woman and I convert too much testosterone into estrogen, so I'm estrogen dominant. That's my genetics. That's who I am walking around day to day. But if I start to eat DIM, a supplement, it may change the way that gene works. So literally the expression of that gene, meaning it's set on a fast speed right now. I can actually change it to a medium speed. But the second I stop eating the DIM, it goes back to fast. So expression is not a alteration, right? It's literally just augmenting from slow, medium, fast, what version of the gene you have based on something you're doing that directly targets that gene. And this is why we make the supplements we make. This is why we recommend what we recommend in the reports, because they do these things for you, right? So that's one. In your environment, lifestyle, yes, there's evidence of you can inherit epigenetic expression one generation apart. And it may fizzle out after that one generation. So it's your ability to cope with that intense trauma. But what you're speaking of more in a broad sense is how are the difference in our environment today and how is that affecting our genes? So what's happening is not that it's affecting our genes, it's that if we are wired of people like 200,000 years ago, and this reality of this industrialized planet we live on is a blip in time of 200,000 years, right? It's what, the last 200 years, maybe 300, industrial farming, the way we see it is the last two generations. So if for 200,000 years we lived a certain way, modern agriculture started 10,000 years ago. So even that is a tiny fraction of our ancestry, right? And this industrialized chemical world started within the last 100, 150 years. We are not designed for it. So a simple example, autism 2 generations ago was 1 in 10,000 kids, right? Autism 1 generation ago was 1 in 500 kids. Autism today is 1 in 50 kids. The kids haven't changed. The DNA is the same. What's changed is the environment, the load, what they're dealing with. They don't have the genetic capacity to deal with the environmental toxins, the chemicals, the pesticides, the glyphosates, what's in their food, what's in their air, the way they don't sleep, all of that. So that load, that's the epigenetic. So now all of a sudden, you're wired to be a Ferrari, beautiful vehicle. Then you take it off-roading on a dirt road. It's not going to survive. Doesn't matter how beautiful that vehicle is. But a Jeep will. You can take a Jeep off-roading. So what are you wired to do? We are not wired for our current environmental reality, which is why there's so much disease and illness and chronic and cancer and heart disease and inflammation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not that our genes are changing. Our genes are the same. Our environment is changing and we aren't wired to cope with it. And to catch up will take way too long. We will be extinct right before our genes change, to catch up. It takes millions of years. So anyways, that's the difference between that epigenetic, there's a trigger that causes certain genes to work harder, but the genes didn't actually change. They're just reacting. Versus, why are we so sick? Our environment is changing exponentially faster than we can catch up genetically.
This is where the genetic work can come in. If it's done right, it can help at least address what's happening in the world to help optimize, at least raise our level of functioning to actually handle the things like the detoxification needs, the inflammatory levels.
Yeah, so the solution is twofold. If you know that genetically you don't do something well, what is a gene? A gene instructs your cell what to do. It promotes a cellular process. So if you're missing or have a bad version of a gene, you don't do that process well. So if you know that about a particular process, your DNA will tell you there's two options. You can either tune the dial of increasing your capacity by taking the right supplements, like you said, or reducing the load of what would cause the problem. And ideally, a little bit of both, right? So you want to end up in this sort of middle ground, this homeostatic state where as if you did have the good genes, as if you did deal with this well, which is reduce the load, all the bad stuff that your body can't handle. It depends on what problem we're talking about, what that load may be, and increase capacity with either the right supplement or the right diet or the right exercise. Again, based on the problem, we can figure out what that is.
It's about optimization.
Yeah, for sure.
And in today's world. There's so much here. Folks, Carol, Robert, Bob, any questions come to mind? Do you have a few more minutes there, Kashif?
Sure, yeah.
Yes, great. Okay. Bob's unmuted himself. So Bob, you have a question?
Kashif, what you said about the autism really intrigues me. So we're going in the wrong direction, obviously, like you said, 1 in 50 now. Maybe the next generation will be 1 in 20 will be, impacted by autism. So if it can be changed, I'll say, is that a niche in which folks like yourself should be focused on to try to get the world to realize, okay, we can correct issues by addressing the genome, and here's a specific one that we can correct. So
Yeah.
is there enlightenment anyway in the powers to be to accept that?
So if you talk to an autistic parent, there's 120% acceptance. They know. If you talk to the autistic medical community, the decision makers, everyone's trying to find that switch, that magic switch. So as an example, Sick Kids Hospital here in Toronto has spent about $8 million on research trying to cure autism, right? And we've met with them. We've advised them on how they're doing things. They could potentially do things differently. So they spent $8 million on research, and we asked them one question: how many kids have you helped? They said none, because we haven't figured it out yet, right? So I said, if you give me $8 today, forget about 8 million, I can buy a supplement that can help 5 kids, because there's enough supply in there for 1 month that you can spread across. They said, what do you mean? 80% of most of these chronic diseases is not something you're born with, including autism. Yes, there are some kids that are born with a genetic condition. They have it. They're born with it. They need that $8 million of research. They need someone to find the switch to turn on and off. Without that, they have it, and they need some kind of therapeutic to deal with it. The majority of kids, and this is true of all diseases, the majority of people aren't in that bucket where they're born with it, right? They caused it by doing something wrong, maybe unintentionally for the most part. So it's the much bigger number of people, but the focus is all here because the research is paid for by pharma, who's trying to find the switch to turn off with a drug, right? So they will eventually fix this, but all these other people are going to stay in this. 90% of our disease budget is spent on chronic disease management because we're not trying to figure out why it happens. We're only trying to say that you have it, now let's manage it.
Right.
That's the model, because they're taking this model here, which we actually do a really good job of. Let's figure out this disease and create a pill, and that's actually the only way to fix this problem. But that same thinking is applied here, which is not the way this part works.
Right.
So to answer your question, this is true for all chronic conditions. What we said about autism and the numbers increasing, breast cancer, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, it's the same everywhere. So if you ask me how we do it, we need to find the partners that are already doing big work in these areas and empower them with the insights. Let's go find that autism hospital or that Alzheimer's clinic that has locations all over the country, and we will help them do a better job. And we kind of start from there.
You can see the large potential, Bob, everyone, with this, wherever a person's bent, practitioner-wise, wherever their bent is, what they're called to provide. There's so many different avenues of assistance that we can look to do. That's particular that we're called to do. My particular call is helping people, again, consciously stay healthy, conscious health.
For sure.
Okay. Any other questions, Carol?
I wanted to ask about hemochromatosis. Do you know anything about that? It's high iron, high ferritin.
Yeah, so that's one of the areas that we don't work on. So that's where it's more of a genetic condition, right? And so the genetic industry is doing a really good job of those genetic switches that need to be turned on and off, right? Where we play is the stuff that they don't do, which is chronic disease and aging. So I can advise you offline on how to figure that out. There are genetic tests for that, right? That's an example of a thing that we don't do. So we don't look for this gene doesn't work, and you literally have this problem. Right.
It could relate, possibly, helping the liver, looking at liver genetics there, or things that relate to the liver, assisting in that respect can help address.
That is where we can help, is now that you know you have this, are you feeling the pain at 2 out of 10 or 8 out of 10? Let's get you to a 2. We can't turn that off. We're not geneticists that can turn off a problem, right? And we don't even know if there's a solution for that problem right now. But what we do know is that if you have it, you may not even know, or you may be feeling 8 out of 10. right? Why? Because other cofactors like your detox in your liver, like your anti-inflammatory response through methylation, like your oxidation load through the mitochondria, if those things are all going wrong, then there's this cofactor that makes that feel exponential. So we do work with things like, for example, Lyme disease, another similar example where we don't cure Lyme disease, but why with Lyme disease is there the person that doesn't even know they have it, the person that's kind of walking around with a flu for a couple of weeks, and then the person that can't get out of bed for 6 months. It's the same bacteria in entering the same human species. Why the variability in outcome? Because of your ability to cope with the inflammatory insult. So we don't cure Lyme disease, but we can get you from the person that can't get out of bed to the person that doesn't know they're sick. Right? And same thing with that. So it's more the functional side of the problem as opposed to the problem itself.
Robert, you have a question? Good, excellent. Robert, you have a question? I see your mic's unmuted.
I do. Yeah, Kashif, you're making an incredibly good case, fine case, for just how much this knowledge base can assist a person. My question has to do with trust, and you've spoken about it a fair amount here. But ultimately, that's the difference between whether someone's going to undertake to actually carry out the recommendations.
Right.
Or, Dr. Oz just said something that, I really like what he just said. I'm going to try that.
Yeah.
And of course, these kinds of recommendations are all over the place.
Yes.
What Kashif has recommended and taking all these pills and so forth, they're so, they're expensive, they're a pain in the neck. I just heard something over here.
Yep.
What's in your business model that specifically targets that creating that kind of trust and maintaining it? Because as you said, that's how you get your return business.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem we're trying to solve in terms of health and wellness, which is there's a ton out there. You Google any problem and you'll get pages and pages and pages and pages of advice, right? So what we're saying is great. Is that the advice you need or that somebody else needed? What we're saying is that genetically, not only we're figuring out what's wrong, we're also figuring how you uniquely need to fix it. So one size fits all, trial and error. That's what current health and wellness looks like. Here's something that some celebrity is going to say worked well for them, and it probably did, but it may work well on 2 out of 10 people and kind of okay on 5 or 6. And then 3 or 4 might actually have an adverse reaction. They might actually get worse from that solution. Right. So this is where what we're saying is anything we recommend to you, we're recommending to you specifically. This is what you need. This is not us just saying, hey, this works. Let's put it into our library or menu of solutions. We're mining your DNA to figure out uniquely what's wrong and uniquely what you need to do to fix it. So we're removing the one size fits all, and we're removing the trial and error. Let me try that diet and this exercise until I finally find something that works for me. Or you could know on day 1, here's how your body works and here's exactly what you need to do. Should I be on a keto diet? It sounds great. I can eat fat and lose fat and be in ketosis and my brain feels amazing. Well, we know the genetics of that pathway and how you actually metabolize fat. So if you don't metabolize fats well, you'll feel really good in the first 2 weeks, and then you're going to start to feel sick. Should I be a vegan? It sounds great. It's, for social reasons, for religious reasons, for whatever reason you decide to become a vegan, there's certain enzymes required to break down chickpeas, lentils, legumes, all the protein sources that a vegan needs, and you may not produce those well. Your genes tell us that. So you don't need to go through that trial and error of figuring out what some guru said works, which probably did work for them. And the truth is that that's why they're so confident in what they're saying, because it did work for them. But ask them how many things they tried before they found that thing that worked for them, right? Which they finally started singing from the rooftops because it's a wow. But I'm sure they tried 5, 6, 7, 8 different things that failed them. So all we're saying is we are unlocking your human instruction manual. Here's your blueprint. It's already telling you what to do. You don't need to guess, no trial and error. and no one size fits all for dosage, for product, for whatever. It's what you need. The trust comes from people's outcomes. You know, when people say that I haven't been able to sleep in 3 years, and within a week I'm sleeping properly. Nobody was able to fix this for me, because we're not trying to fix your sleep. We're just saying, here's how to optimize your body, and then all the symptoms will kind of go away, right? When somebody says that, like myself, I've had eczema for 6 years and nothing works, and all of a sudden we say, well, don't treat the eczema, treat your glutathione pathway, the detox system that's causing the inflammation that's leading to eczema, and then it goes away. So that in itself, the wow factor people get for the sort of instant gratification of feeling better, then they want to do everything, right? Then they're like, well, I want to dive deeper and deeper and deeper, and now I want to work on prevention. Forget about what I just reversed. So I don't know, that's kind of how we think about what you're saying.
Does that help, Robert? Does that help address that?
Well, there's one more corollary to that.
Sure.
The subconscious drives that we all have, they're the habit patterns, they're very powerful. And they actually need to be addressed.
Yeah.
I mean, you pointed that out when you're talking about PS, I always get those words mixed up. PF.
Yes.
Anyway.
Post-traumatic stress
Yeah.
disorder.
Yeah.
PTSD.
Yeah.
And then you're talking about, you know, a woman, say, who is constantly being, you know, overwrought by her husband, who's being dominant, whatever the case may be. And there's a buildup, the continuous buildup of energy, you know, in terms of making assumptions that start you at a higher level each time something happens, you know, rather than releasing it all.
Right.
That sounds like you need to provide a lot of counseling.
Yes.
And is that something you provide?
Yeah, so that's one thing we learned, is that we can provide as much information as we think is needed, but when it comes to clinical representation, like somebody actually has a problem they're trying to fix, then they need coaching. And the way we currently think about allopathic medicine is, when something hurts, you call the doctor, right? Go eat what you want, do what you want, smoke what you want, and when you break yourself, the doctor's supposed to fix you. That's kind of how we think about medicine. So what we believe is that health happens in between all of those visits, all the behavior changes, all the constant coaching. And what we learned from Dr. BJ Fogg is that the ideal scope for actually changing a habit and making your new identity is 9 weeks. And we've mapped out exactly what you do in those 9 weeks, from week to week to week. And we can take you from, I've never been to a gym, to working out is who I am. That's my life. I do it. And you cannot take me out of the gym now. That's what it takes if you effectively work on behavior change. So yes, so to answer your question, we do have coaching programs, from a single phone call to this 9 weeks, like I said, to executive programs that are much deeper dives for people that are saying, well, the report is great, I'm learning about myself, but my mom had breast cancer, I don't want it. I want someone to help me. Or, you know, I have a cholesterol problem, I want to get off this pill. So a specific goal, let's work on it, let's fix it. We have programs for that.
Yeah.
You know, Kashif, I just want to say something. I really appreciate this talk, because, you know, most people don't understand how their body works, you know, how the systems come into play.
Right.
And you're providing that with the test. I mean, I've done the test, I'm waiting. I can't wait to get my results, but but anyway, you know, I was thinking to what Robert had to say, you know, at some point, you've got to take responsibility for yourself. I think so many people just, like you said, they just want to go to the medical doctor, just drop their body off and say,
Right.
Fix it for me, please. And, but, you know, at some point, even with the coaching, the coach can do everything, like, you know, try to get you to change those habits. But ultimately, you have to want to get better and take responsibility. So, but you know, it really sounds reasonable and practical information, you know, that we received today.
The
So
way
thank you
I've been
very
s-
much.
Right. Way I've been seeing it is when I receive someone's genomic work there, like I distill it down and present that, and then I'll see patients, periodically to review. But I think too, the coaching programs can come in handy if folks really needed that
Mhm.
deeper work to stay consistent. So I really appreciate the services that the DNA company has, where I can provide at least a starting point and some continuing point, but then having an extra two programs to help along if needed for someone.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where we didn't, like most companies will go build something and then try and sell it. What we did is we have interpretation. Our product is really interpretation. We understand the genome better. So we actually interviewed 80 clinicians one by one to say, how do you need this presented? What is your problems? Why can't you adopt genetics into practice? So then we built not what we wanted to build, but what was needed, including the coaching, including, speaking to people like Robert and saying, hey, what about this? That's why we realized we need it. And so that's how we built everything.
Yes. I don't know how much time you have left, but can you just speak to the true age complement to the longevity
Yeah, so
work?
True Age is
Yeah.
a separate company, True Diagnostics. We talked about epigenetics. So they'll actually measure. So where we measure your DNA, here's who you are. Here's your wiring, your blueprint. They will measure in time, how are you expressing? Meaning, is your body experiencing that trauma right now, right? And they'll give you what they call a biological age. Based on your habits, how old are you on the inside? And is that matching your chronological age? So again, not our product, not our company, but we work closely with them because we believe that we can prove that we can reduce your biological age. If we do everything right, just targeting inflammation, just that one thing. If we can hit inflammation hard, we can reduce your biological age. So it's just a really cool product. It's a blood test. You can order it through our website, but you can also order it directly from them. And it just allows us to benchmark where you're at epigenetically and then kind of prove outcomes.
Right. It's a lot more than looking at biological age, though. It's more to see if you're actually following through with the recommendation or what the your genomic report has shown.
Yeah, you'll see the outcome. You'll see that your genetic expression changes.
So it's a monitoring tool.
For sure. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Before we end, any pressing questions? Any other pressing questions? Kashif, okay, we really appreciate this time with you and look to share more with you. And there's such a large topic, isn't it? And it's almost like we know this much, but there's a whole lot more.
We could pick any area and talk for an hour. We could have just talked about anxiety for an hour. There's so much deeper we can go, but that's the beauty of it, is if anyone out there is either trying to prevent or reverse a problem, we can really dive deep.
Yeah, very good. Well, we'll look to share more with you. We really appreciate your time.
No, it was a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Enjoy your day, everyone.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye.
Steve. Take care.
Bye. Bye. I'm going to close the recording. I can find that. There we go.
All right. Right on time.
Yes, right on time.